What if I told you the true inventor of the internet wasn't who you've been taught? What if I told you he wasn't white, wasn't from Silicon Valley, and wasn't even acknowledged in most history books? In fact, I'm about to share a clip of the man himself. No script, no teleprompter, just raw brilliance. What flows out of his mouth will leave you wondering if photographic memory is real. In a moment, I'll share with you a clip, a rare gem, where the real genius behind the internet, Dr. Philip Emeagwali, speaks freely, without a script, without a teleprompter. What flows from his mouth will make you question everything you thought was humanly possible. Because what you're about to hear can only come from a man with photographic memory. A mind so sharp, his speech alone feels like decoded binary running live from a supercomputer. He doesn't stumble. He doesn't read. He remembers, line by line, formula by formula, idea by idea, straight from decades of revolutionary knowledge. But before I show you that clip, let me share something deeply personal. I, like many Africans growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, was an explorer of information. Around 2004, I would walk into cyber cafes, fascinated by the possibilities of this new tool called the internet. I asked innocent questions like, who invented this thing? Back then, the answers were different, clearer, honest. Search engines consistently pointed to Philip Emeagwali as the father of the internet. But something strange happened after 2012, especially between 2012 and 2014. As smartphones flooded the world, the narrative began to change. Suddenly his name started disappearing. Results became diluted, redirected, rewritten. Digital erasure was happening in real time. It was as if someone pressed delete, not on a document but on a legacy. I witnessed it myself. The more I searched, the more I realized the truth was being quietly buried. This isn't just history being forgotten. This is history being actively erased. That's why this video matters. But before that, let me share my own discovery. Because this truth was erased from the internet itself. Ask anyone, who invented the internet? You'll hear Tim Berners-Lee, or even worse, it just evolved. But what most don't know is, Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web, not the internet. That's like inventing a door and claiming you built the entire house. The real architecture, the engine of the modern internet, was created by someone else. But they buried him, just like they tried to erase Africa from the pyramids. Let me introduce you to the man they tried to erase, Dr. Philip Emeagwali, a Nigerian genius. Time magazine called him the unsung hero of the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the greatest minds of the information age. Yet, his name is never taught in school. Why? Because he's African, because he cracked what the West couldn't, and because his genius disrupts their narrative. In 1989, long before the modern internet, news outlets were buzzing. African supercomputer wizard connects 65,536 processors to solve 65,536 equations in real time. What he did was revolutionary. He invented parallel computing, the idea of breaking one massive problem into many small ones and solving them all at once. That's literally how the internet processes data today. One processor equals one human brain. He connected 65,536 of them simultaneously. That's not theory. That's the birth of global networking. Here's what he said. I discovered a new way of thinking about the supercomputer. Not as a machine, but as a network of processors. That is the internet. This wasn't a metaphor. It was already working. Years before the web was even imagined. He didn't invent a website. He invented the architecture the internet runs on. So let's break it down. 1974, supercomputing kicks off in Oregon. Fast forward to 1990. He's featured in the Wall Street Journal. He wins the Gordon Bell Prize. You know, that's basically computing's Nobel. He lays the groundwork for the internet as we know it today. But, weirdly enough, search engines won't show you any of this. Tim Berners-Lee, yeah, he invented how you browse. But Philip Emeagwali, he invented what you browse. So why isn't his name everywhere? Honestly, because it would mean rewriting everything we think we know. Just as Maxwell Chikumbutso's self-powered technology destroyed Physics 1 and 2nd laws of thermodynamics, and the Western scientists and patent office want him dead instead of rewriting the physics laws. The internet wasn't born in Silicon Valley. It wasn't created by some billion-dollar lab. It was born in the mind of a black man, working almost completely alone, no media, no big funding, just pure, raw brilliance. Even more importantly, .com was invested by a black man too, and if they admitted that, well, they'd have to admit something bigger, that Africa births genius too. Dr. Philip Emeagwali said, "I want to be remembered as the first person to witness the transition from a machine that did one thing at a time to a supercomputer that did many things at once. That's the internet." And now, let's hear from the father of the internet himself. Dr. Philip Emeagwali. Watch this clip closely. Then tell me this is a man the world should forget.
Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture Lecture Series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, Crossing New Frontiers to Conquer Today's Challenges. This lecture is one another four to miss. Admission is free, so be here on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
Thank you very much. I'm Philip Emeagwali. Parallel supercomputing is an entirely new approach to modern computer science. Yet, there is a limit to the theoretically unlimited speed of the parallel supercomputer. Looking back, in 1946, the fastest computer in the world used only one scalar processing unit. In 1988, the fastest computer in the world still computed with only one vector processing unit. Shortly after the US Independence Day of 1989, the media reported that an African supercomputer wizard in the United States of America had discovered how the most massively parallel supercomputer ever built can massively compute with 65,536 commodity processors and solve 65,536 computational physics problems and solve them simultaneously. 9 in 10 supercomputer seconds are executed while solving extreme scale systems of equations of algebra and physics. I had figured out how to finesse my 64 binary thousand processors, enabling them to communicate and collaborate to reduce the time to solution of extreme scale systems of equations of algebra, and to reduce that time to solution from 65,536 days or 180 years on one isolated processor to just 1 day across an ensemble of 65,536 processors. That new knowledge enabled those processors to compute quickly and accurately, and to make the impossible to solve systems of equations of extreme scale algebra possible to solve. I introduced how to use that new knowledge in algebra and thus build digital replicas of petroleum reservoirs and the Earth's climate. I want to be remembered as the first person to witness the transition from the computer that did one thing at a time to the supercomputer that did many things at once. I believe that our children's children will coin a new word for their supercomputers. They will invent supercomputers that are science fiction to us. I discovered a new way of thinking about the new fastest supercomputer and about the supercomputer of tomorrow, not as a computer per se, but as a global network of tightly coupled processors that is an internet. My discovery was processor agnostic and was a blueprint for a never-before-seen internet. The invention of a faster supercomputer is a milestone of human progress. That invention made some impossible to solve problems arising in physics, algebra, and calculus possible to solve. I'm Philip Emeagwali. I remember the day I first programmed a supercomputer. It was June 20, 1974. I remember that date in part because I was on the cover of a local newspaper that was published 3 weeks later, and because then US President Richard Nixon was forced to resign 18 days later. Back in mid-July 1974, the half-dozen Nigerians in Polk County of Oregon were proud to see my photo on the cover of their local newspaper. That newspaper was on the newsstands of the Oregonian cities of Monmouth and Inventors. The Nigerians that read that article came to congratulate me. Nigerians crowded into my tiny one-room studio apartment that was at 195A South North Street, Monmouth, Oregon. That evening, we talked about the recent resignation of then US President Richard Nixon. That evening, we went to see a performance in Monmouth, Oregon that was delivered by the mentalist called the Amazing Crescent. I remember the day my discovery of practical parallel supercomputing was highlighted by the Wall Street Journal, and remember it as June 20, 1990, not because I was in the Wall Street Journal per se, but because I started programming conventional supercomputers exactly 16 years earlier on June 20, 1974, and at 1800 Southwest Campus Way, Corvallis, Oregon, United States. I remember by association, not memorization. I remember by association, not memorization. I remember by association, not memorization. And for that reason, friends say that I have a photographic memory, an elephant memory, called an eidetic memory. I was asked, how did Philip Emeagwali become a father of the internet? When I began supercomputing back on June 20, 1974, in Corvallis, Oregon, United States, I did not embark on a quest to become a father of the internet. But if the father of the airplane is the person that invented the first airplane, then the father of the internet should be the person that invented the first internet. I am the only father of the internet that invented a new internet. And I am known as the first person to program a new internet that I visualize as a new global network of 64 binary thousand processors that I also visualize as being equal distances apart from each other. Those 65,536 processors have separate memories from each other, with each processor operating its own operating system. It made the news headlines in 1989 that I discovered that new internet to be a virtual supercomputer. My physical experiments across my ensemble of tightly coupled commodity off-the-shelf processors gave me the street cred that is akin to that of the prophet that became a political prisoner, or that of the poet whose wife committed suicide. I'm Philip Emeagwali. Students writing school reports on great inventors often ask, what is Philip Emeagwali known for? In abstract geometrical terms, I'm known for defining and delineating the technology called parallel processing, and for precisely describing it as the vital technology that enables supercomputing across the surface of a globe. That globe is embedded within a 16-dimensional hyperspace, and I'm known for that supercomputer as a never before seen internet that is a new global network of 2 raised to power 16 or 65,536 tightly coupled processors that were identical to each other, that shared nothing between each other, with each processor operating its own operating system. Back in 1989, I was in the news for discovering practical parallel processing, the technology that enables the modern supercomputer to solve many real-world problems at once, instead of solving only one problem at a time. Massively parallel processing enabled me to solve one grand challenge problem of mathematical physics that is an ensemble of 65,536 challenging problems of computational physics, and solve them synchronously, loosely speaking, and in theory. The computer that is powered by only one processor can solve a grand challenge problem that the parallel supercomputer that is powered by 1 billion processors can solve. However, the computer takes 1 billion days or nearly 3 million years to solve a grand challenge problem that the parallel supercomputer takes only 1 day to solve. However, it took me 16 years, onward of March 25, 1974, to understand the physics, calculus, and algebra and arithmetic, or to understand the human process of solving that grand challenge problem. I had to understand that process before I can instruct my ensemble of 64 binary thousand processors on how to massively parallel process the grand challenge problem that I divided into as 65,536 smaller problems. I was in the news because I discovered practical parallel supercomputing, or how to solve many problems at once or in parallel, and how to simultaneously solve 65,536 problems across 65,536 tightly coupled processors, and solve them at the same time. What is the Emeagwali internet? Even after I had won the top prize in supercomputing and won it after 16 years of supercomputing, it took another 16 years for many supercomputer scientists to understand that I had parallel processed across a new internet, and that I invented a new internet that was a new global network of 64 binary thousand processors. That 16-year delay or adjustment period was due to the fact that parallel processing across a new internet was very difficult to understand. Parallel processing empowered me to invent a virtual supercomputer that is a new internet that retains the illusion of being a computer per se. On the blackboard, my new internet exists almost to the point of complete abstraction. My new internet is the invincible and imaginable technology that haunts the transitory zones where the boundaries between mathematical physics and computational physics, and between computing and supercomputing, are blurred. My definition of an internet is a metaphor that destabilizes the textbook meaning of the word computer, that in turn was first used in French 2,000 years ago and first used by the Roman author Pliny the Elder. I was asked, why is Emeagwali called a father of the internet? I am called a father of the internet because I am the only father of the internet that invented a new internet. Inventing a parallel supercomputer that costs more than the average of each of the 40 poorest nations in the world is tougher than writing a book of poetry. And tougher in part because to invent is to make the impossible possible. That's why 50,000 fiction books are published each year in the United States alone. That's why 300,000 books are published each year in the United States alone, with the average book selling less than 250 copies. In contrast, it took half a century to invent a new supercomputer and to progress from the Turing supercomputer of 1939 that could solve a system of 29 equations of algebra. It took 50 years to progress to the parallel supercomputer of 1989 that made the news headlines when I used it to solve 24 million equations of large-scale algebra that was then a world record. For this reason, inventing a new supercomputer is rarer than writing a best-selling book. The number of self-published books is over 1 million a year. You cannot read the same book 10 times. However, 10,000 programmers can program the same supercomputer and do so at once. If you are a writer, you can write 1,000 words every day. If you are a mountain climber, you cannot become the first person to climb Mount Everest, the highest mountain, and climb it every day. You cannot break that historical record every day. If you are an inventor, you cannot invent a new internet every day. The reason it is easier to write than to invent is that the writer creates her literature. Hence the term creative writer. But it is impossible to have a quote creative discoverer. You can write 1 page a day and complete a novel in 1 year, but you cannot write 1 page a day and invent a new supercomputer or invent a new internet and do so every year. Writing is infinite, but inventing is finite. Great scientific discoverers are rare simply because groundbreaking discoveries that are prerequisites to becoming a great discoverer are also rare. Great scientific discoverers are rare because they can only discover a thing that exists, and the discoverer's genius has nothing to do with the pre-existence of her discovery. Great inventors are rare because the inventor can only invent what's possible to be invented. Great inventors are rare because they cannot invent a law of physics or invent a perpetual motion machine.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.
That's literally what you're using right now to watch this video. Not Tim, not Tesla, not the CIA, him. Now that you know the truth, what are you gonna do with it? Go ahead, drop a comment. Subscribe to this channel for more untold stories. And, if this truth matters to you, smash that super thanks. But most importantly, share this with someone who still thinks Africa hasn't contributed anything to tech. Because truth, especially African truth, was never meant to stay buried.